board game, a tabletop game. So this is the team from Eldfall Chronicles, and they prepared a special presentation for us. Let's give them a hand, and here's a microphone.
Thank you, thank you. So yeah, hey, nice to meet you. I'm Žiga, CEO of Free Company. This is Samo, one of my developers and community representative. He takes basically care of everything from rules to the community. So pleased to meet you. It's a bit unusual to be on a video game convention, but nevertheless we are a new game, and well, since it's a game, it's not that different than any kind of game, either if it's a tabletop or a digital game. So yeah. I guess we'll give you a bit of an overview of what Eldfall Chronicles is and what we do at Free Company and how we make it possible. Okay. So as I said, the company is called Free Company, and our game that we are making is called Eldfall Chronicles. It's a rather new game. We as a company are about 1.5 years old. I guess what's special about the company is that our product was brought to life through a successful Kickstarted campaign. This campaign was basically for our, how would you put it, like first edition of the game called Eldfall Chronicles Skirmish war game. I'll explain what that means in a bit, but in a sense it's very similar to many PC RPGs. I don't know, think like Divinity, Original Sin and things like that, Diablo and so on. Well, I guess if I wrap it up for about the company, what works for us is that we have a full in-house development and production, meaning that we do everything from illustration, graphical design, game development, well, world building, lore, and so on and so on. So yeah, we do everything like that on our own. And I guess what's special about our product is that it's a physical product. So it's not only, I mean, we do have like digital assets and so on that people can use and help as a, help and companion to the tabletop game. But at the same time, we specialize in physical manufacturing, so in actual physical objects, miniatures, and so on. So yeah, let's move on to what Eldfall Chronicles is. As I mentioned, it's a tabletop skirmish war game with miniatures. So what that means, it's not it's a tabletop game, but like when I say tabletop games, people usually think about board games. It's a bit different. It goes into the same category. Like there's a small distinction here. Like board games are typically like enclosed games with a board and other components. Nowadays they often use miniatures, but these are usually low quality miniatures made of PVC and cheaper plastics and so on. They're typically, basically they're just as an eye candy, an extra value, not particularly so that you can do anything really with it. On the other hand, tabletop war games are a different animal of games, if you could call it like that. They are more complex, they constantly evolve, they have an open concept, meaning that they are not concluded. They are made in a way that you can add new story, lore, expand them, and so on. And another thing that really puts them out from board games is that we have like an open movement. So we are not using anything like grid and so on to move things around. It's basically using a measurer. So that's why I say that it's more simple, similar to PC games like, as I mentioned, Divinity, Diablo, and so on. At the same time, one important distinctive element of tabletop war games are the miniatures. They're typically of a very high level, and especially when it comes to quality. They're very made of resins and so on, and yeah, basically the whole genre includes like a hobby aspect, which is painting and assembling of these miniatures. It allows a lot of customization and community engagement and so on. So that's about the miniatures, and like just for a reference, you will see later, these are typically very small, but you will see how detailed they are a bit later. Like they are this size usually. Of course they can get bigger if you're a collector and so on, but still. So as I mentioned, when we were making Eldfall Chronicles, of course we were actually more inspired by PC games rather than other tabletop war games and board games. Meaning that we wanted to include various RPG and tactical combat game mechanics to the game, in a sense making it much closer to the modern audience when compared to, for example, older generations. Like, I bet you all probably know Warhammer and things like that. It's probably the most popular like element in the genre, but nevertheless, like a lot of new games came out that are well much more fluid than that. So one thing that sets us apart with most tabletop games is quick, intuitive and dynamic gameplay. Samo can later tell you more about that, but in a sense the game is very fast, very intuitive. It feels like a real combat. We like to call the rules, easy to play, hard to master. So it's very easy to get into the game, and playing is basically just you thinking how to do things. It also features activation and reaction mechanics, meaning that both players are constantly engaged. Like one of the typical criticisms of tabletop games is that you do your turn and then you have to wait for all other players to finish theirs. Our game is not like that. Basically all players play all the time, so react against one another. And yeah, as I already mentioned, we in a sense mastered the manufacturing of physical miniatures to high level, and that's just one of the things we excel. So what makes us special? Eldfall Chronicles is basically set in a high fantasy, realistic and immersive setting with monsters and magic. But what that simply means, we didn't want to make it, a dry game, basically just, a typical fantasy trope, like a game with magic and knights and everything like that. We wanted to have a very strong, realistic basis. But of course, for some models less than others. But we really wanted to put them a different spin on it, include logic behind our design and so on. So yeah, that means basically that we used a lot of historical realism to base our designs on. And as I mentioned before, we have dynamic and intuitive gameplay, and I think I will just give a microphone to someone to tell you more about that and how actions and reactions work in the game.
Yeah, my name is Samo. I'm one of the designers at Eldfall Chronicles. About the gameplay, one thing we have to think when we are making the board game is that the rules need to be enforced by the players while they are playing. That is one of the big differences between a computer game and a tabletop game. The rules in a computer game are being enforced by the engine, by the game, so we can make the rules very complex. While in a board game we need to make it intuitive, so the players can focus on the tactical aspect of the game, not on the rules aspect. So they can use the rules as a means to achieve tactical ends. So how do we do that? We do that by making a very simple rule set that allows for many different actions to be taken by the player. So we have a core system where every model gets an activation point or a certain number of activation points, and they can spend it on actions. And every time an action is spent, the opposition, if they saw this action, can react by spending their own activation points. So the core premise is very simple. Everybody has activation points. I can spend activation points for certain actions. However, those actions then become complex when you include 3D movement on the table with the models into any direction up to a certain distance. So we have free movement, we don't have a grid. This becomes very complex when you include different types of weapons, when you include different types of spells, etc. So the options add the complexity, not the rules. That is a very important aspect. And as Žiga was saying, Eldfall Chronicles is a very dynamic game because of the action-reaction system. As Žiga said, most games have a I go turn, you go turn. While my opponent is doing stuff, I'm just waiting for things to happen, maybe roll some saves or something like that. In Eldfall Chronicles, your opponent's turn is as important as your own turn to mimic realism, because everything is constantly in motion. So your models also get a set of activation points with which you can react if you have line of sight. So we have this concept of line of sight in the game. So if your model saw somebody run across the street, they can take out their bow and shoot that model while your opponent is doing their own actions. And that brings this level of realism, this level of back and forth into the game that constantly engages all of the players. And what we also really wanted with the game was for it to be dynamic and fast-paced. So we have a board that is 36 by 36 inches or 95 by 95 centimeters, and most models can move across that board in a single turn. So everybody can get where they want very fast. And that really creates a dynamic situation where everything is constantly shifting. However, everybody controls only 3 models per side, which means you can't cover all of the table with only 3 models, but you can get to where you want to. So having enough room, but also having enough speed, builds dynamics in the game and makes it a lot more fast-paced. That is just a short elevator pitch about the core mechanics of that.
Thanks, Samo. So yeah, and then again, of course, there was a factor like how to make things really visually appealing for the players and so on. That's where we wanted to include like different factions players can relate with, classes and so on. But at the same time, like a lot of us have experience in those or other historical martial arts, and that's something we want to implement in the game, and also in the game mechanics. So it does actually feel like a real combat. So if you're participating in anything like that, I think you'll find the resemblance quite easily. And then again, of course, like most tabletop games have like either cooperative or competitive aspect to it. We have both. So we're one of the rare games that actually include a so-called AI mechanics into the game, where the game can actually determine how monsters and so on will move on the table and fight against the player. But other than that, like the game is open to evolution and we plan to add a lot of things to in the future. So as I said, we have top quality miniatures, and these are just some of the samples of the first edition. You can see the 2 cents for the scale. And yeah, a big part of the whole thing is the hobby aspect to it. So the minis usually come unpainted and unassembled. And like a big thing of the game is that people assemble them at home and paint them however they like, personalize them. And yeah, we specialize basically in making them very detailed, as detailed as possible, but at the same time we need to optimize them for physical manufacturing, but it's not the easiest. And basically these are the 4 factions we currently have, and of course there are some more models that you can see if you Google us out. Another thing is we already expanding the game. In June we'll be going to Kickstarted yet again to basically advertise a new expansion in Northern Wind. Basically that means that we'll be introducing dungeon crawl and roguelike mechanics to the game, making it a lot more narrative driven and of course include new elements to it and so on. So please check us out if you're interested in games like that or in general. So about making the game. Here I wanted to point out that making a tabletop game is not that different from making a digital game. I think that of course there are differences, but like the huge difference is I think the usage and knowledge of technologies and so on and what's at your disposal and what's not. So just like in any game, deep lore and research matters a lot. It adds a lot of that to the game. It adds to the mechanics, it adds to the background and how well a player can relate to the whole thing. Quality assets make a difference. It adds to the immersion in how you want to portray the game. Definitely when a game is rather new and doesn't have like an IP that it can use to piggyback upon. And yeah, that's when it comes to like us to make quality illustrations, quality assets the players can use. Like every single component needs to have a maximum level that we can put out. So yeah, just a little bit about that. What there is with the tabletop games that digital games maybe don't have is we are more restricted when it comes to what we can actually implement into the actual game. And why is that? Just as Samo pointed out earlier, we need to take in consideration that players need to basically be the engine themselves. So the rules are enforced by them, not by the game itself. That's one big thing we need to keep in mind when designing the rules and what components we want to implement. As you can see, we have like a lot of things like tokens and so on. These are there to basically help you visually track what's happening on the battlefield. Then we come to the sculpts, which I think are our specialty. As I said, some are less grounded in realism than others. I guess the example we're using is the former, not the latter. Basically how it goes is you have to make like a concept from illustration from back and front and behind. Then we put it to the digital sculptor. They do the digital model. Then we have to 3D print the model, which is of course not easy because like the 3D file needs to be very much optimized to get a quality small miniature out. as well as that if a mini has so many details, the 3D printing is quite prone to failure. And upon that, you also need a hell of a good 3D printer to even be able to pull it out like this. Other than that, when that's done, we look at it, if everything is okay, we will send a prototype into painting for promotional stuff like that, as you can see with the paint on mini on the right. And after that, we actually go into manufacturing. We make rubber molds, inject them. I mean, actually, well, it's a bit different and complicated process, but basically the minis are handmade, handcrafted in silicone molds in resin. Well, probably with the highest quality resin currently available on the market. So yeah, in short, making a physical product is quite challenging, especially later on when it comes to logistics and everything related to that. Just a few more of our designs, how things work together, and how basically a pro painted mini looks like. And once again, I'd like to remind this is about designs. So yeah. Some more of that material, these are basically characters for the Northern Wind, and of course some more stuff later on. Yeah, simply put, that's what we did for what Eldfall Chronicles is in a short overview. Follow us up on different media, you can check the links here. And if you're interested in tabletop games, I would like to give a shout out to a few communities here in Slovenia. We have a very thriving community. One is Črna Lukna Gaming Store in Ljubljana Center. If you have any questions, where to go and so on, they can point you. Otherwise, we have Društvo Amulet D20 for those interested in D&D and stuff like that, LARPing, miniature painting and so on. And if you're into more serious competitive play, you always have Wargaming Slovenia to look after. And yeah, I mean, like I really would like to put shout out that communities are really something that drives tabletop games. Hobby aspect is huge when it comes to this. I guess that's one big plus when communities actually, stimulate player stimulates one another for a regular gameplay sessions and so on. They basically have to drive such games on, and it's a really enjoyable interaction. And yeah, let me be about that when it comes to Eldfall Chronicles. Thank you guys for the attention, and if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to ask, either now or later.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We have a question from our resident questioner, Isto. Let's go.
Microphone is on the way.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing, guys. So I have a question about your AI.
Yeah.
How smart is it? So what are the rules for it?
Simply put, not as smart as it can be in a video game, but at the same time, it's basically an AI that reacts to the situation on the table. So it has a hierarchy of behavior depending on where your models are placed in relation to, for example, an AI monster, and the monster will have certain behaviors assigned to what it can do according to the situation on the table. So in a sense, it's not as smart as in most video games, but for a tabletop game, it's quite complex, and it's not that easy to outplay.
So, like, how many different choices do you have when I imagine everyone plays AI, so they together decide what it has to do, or how does it work?
The models first we have different ways how to, define what models can activate and what not. When it comes to player, they can resource manage on their own with those activation points, what they do. Creatures, the AI creatures also have them. However, it's a bit different which one will activate depending on the tier, so in a sense, how bad the monster is. And then it really depends, like, more ferocious monsters will have more varying behaviors. They'll be more vicious, more difficult to predict and so on, while the lesser monsters will be much easier to move around and outplay and so on. I hope that answers it in a sense.
As far as I can imagine, I guess. I have to play to understand.
Yeah, definitely do. Like, we are active in the community and so on, so if you want to try to understand, give us a word. Happy to help.
I have one more question since I already have the mic. Just a simple one. How long does it take from concept to finish for one character, for example?
For one character, well, of course, it depends on the general complexity. By on average, we usually get the concept done, of course, after we define the lore behind and stats and everything like that. I'm not counting that, but like from the concept art usually takes us about 3 days to make. A day, plus or less, depending on the concept. And then when we work with the 3D artist, I usually do that, and I direct the whole process, and that usually can take up to 3 weeks for a single mini to get made. Then the 3D printing, which usually takes about 3 days to a week to get a successful print done. We have to analyze it, check it out, and so on, so that adds another week to the whole thing. And before the manufacturing, we need to optimize it. So what that means, like, you cannot simply take a 3D model from a video game and print it out, because it will simply fail, and if you want to mass produce it in molds, that will be a disaster. Like when it comes to the digital game, like it's a similar process with video games. You do the basic mesh, but in video games you go to animating textures and so on. What we have to do is put it in a pose, which is at the same time different than your other models have, but at the same time it's something that it's actually possible to physically mass produce. So that of course that can again take up to 2 weeks. So in total I would say that for a single mini it takes about a month to 2 months to successfully make and be ready for mass production. Thanks.
I really like the art. I
Thanks.
have a couple questions about this. So my first question is, how many artists worked on this game? And the second is, do you have the artist in-house, or do you commission the work outsource? If you do, how do you go finding these artists? What is your process?
Well, for most of things you see here, I'm the artist. I basically started the whole thing as my passion, so it just evolved from there. But otherwise, we do also work with a few other artists. Currently, well, I do the most of the art, the character art, the landscape art, and so on. But we are now working with another Slovenian artist. Her social handles are art of Žiga. She's very good. But otherwise, we also work with another German artist for a few earlier concepts and so on. But basically, I do the most of art direction and illustration in the game and concept design and so on. So that's how I go about finding the artist. But otherwise, yeah, like using a lot, surfing a lot on ArtStation, Pinterest, like to get the inspirations and so on, to get the creative brain going. That's basically the main process of how we do things.
That's really impressive.
Thanks.
One other question. How long is it expected in the production world for one illustration like that to take? Do you take a couple hours? Do you take a week for it? It can range a lot.
Yeah, it really depends like on the whole complexity and what we want with the model. Like for the more important characters, it takes more time because there's more things to consider, more things to try. Like often, if you have like a finished design already, there's always something to improve. And yeah, you do a lot of back and forth when it comes to that. With more simple, let's call them like boards or like minions and so on, that's simple. Like we can get one design done in a couple of hours, but when it comes to characters, it usually takes days. And I honestly like to take like about a week for a model to get finished. But then again, I can do multiple in 1 week because it's also not healthy to work only on one design throughout the whole week and so on. It's good to like do it to a certain point, then work on something else, then return back to the what you did, because you will see the mistakes you did and see the room for improvement and so on. So then it really depends like how fast you are, depending on the day and all the factors, but it usually takes around a week for a character.
Thank you.
Thanks.
What's your first batch size of, I don't know, the most? How many copies did you make of the biggest item that's like a single SKU? And how did you decide on the number?
Well, for the single SKUs, as the basic core component, we took our core boxes in consideration. So a box where you get 4 factions within like 4 models for each faction and so on, and one bigger monster, the Colossus, the big thing you see in the middle. So basically, we decided to go with 1,500 units for the first run. We calculated the number upon, of course, the demand, and of course within the scope of how to put it, like what would be a good like minimum, not really minimum order quantity, but what would be a good quantity to order in relation to the price of manufacturing. So that was a big thing to consider. And also logistics, for example, we know that like we started making this game during COVID. So before that we were simply students, and when COVID hit, we basically had some extra time at our hands to learn all the graphical design, illustration and so on, and we basically went from there. So we had to learn all these skills and so on, but like COVID was especially not a friendly period for global logistics because prices skyrocketed. So that was another thing to consider, because like moving a pallet overseas from, for example, the manufacturing facility in China to Europe or the US, like that, the prices would vary greatly depending on from month to month and so on. So that was also a huge thing to consider, to not have too much inventory to transport, and at the same time to have enough inventory to cover the demand. So we wanted to, like, first thing we had to consider, we had to fulfill the Kickstarter. Kickstarter changed a lot in the past decade. Before it was like a pre-sales platform where it was the best thing in the world to buy a game on Kickstarter because it was cheaper, I mean, than in regular sales and so on, and it had a lot of exclusives. Nowadays it's not like that. Nowadays, like, there's a lot of competition, especially in the tabletop genre, and you really need to make a good product to be really noticed, and especially as a first-time creator, you really need to get the trust of the backers. So that's another thing to consider. Like, we had well over 500 backers on the Kickstarter, which is not a huge amount for the first game. But that was enough for us to manufacture the whole thing and, well, have some extra inventory to put it into sales and so on, and that basically shows now. So now we have like we were able to fulfill the Kickstarter, we have extras for the sales, and now we can actually push the games into distribution, retail sales and so on, and that worked great for us. And we are already looking into like second run, third run and so on, including making, you know, the Kickstarter expansion we'll be doing this year. So yeah. Cool. A bit of a wide answer. I can't really nail it down to. There's not one formula how you decide. You have to keep multiple things into consideration.
All right. Thank you for the talk. Big hand for the guys team. And that wraps up our 2 hours here at Game Gang. Thanks again to Game Gang for hosting us. Like I said at the beginning, you're all invited to join us across the street for some free drinks. If you want to come back later, at the door, at the brewery, you get a stamp on your can and you can come back and check out other stuff going on here today. Thanks again for coming, and see you over there.